You are sitting at your kitchen table right now, probably doing something so instinctive you haven't given it a second thought in years. You reach out, your fingers closing around the handle of a ceramic mug. You gauge the weight, the heat of the liquid, and the exact amount of tension required in your bicep to lift it to your lips without spilling a drop. Your brain is performing millions of calculations every second just to keep your hands steady and your balance centered. It is a masterpiece of biological engineering, a feat of coordination that took years of trial and error to perfect. But then you look across the room, or perhaps you remember a moment from your own life, at a human infant. It is lying on its back, staring at a ceiling fan with a look of profound, glassy-eyed confusion. If a fly lands on its nose, it cannot brush it away. If it becomes too cold, it cannot reach for a blanket. If it is hungry, it can do nothing but scream a generic alarm into the void and hope that a more capable being interprets the signal correctly. It is, by every measurable standard of the animal kingdom, a catastrophe of design. It is the most helpless creature on the face of the earth, a biological blank slate that seems almost purposefully designed to fail the most basic tests of survival. Every other creature on this planet arrives with a set of instructions, a functional body, and a clear path toward independence. But we arrive unfinished. We are born into a world we cannot navigate, in bodies we cannot control, possessing minds that are essentially empty vessels. You'd think this would be a fatal flaw for a species trying to dominate the globe. You'd think the cold, hard logic of evolution would have weeded out such a glaring vulnerability millions of years ago. You might assume this helplessness is just a temporary phase, a short delay before the human machine kicks into gear. But when you compare us to the rest of the natural world, the gap isn't just a delay, it's a chasm. Imagine a newborn wildebeest on the African savanna. Within 6 minutes of entering the light, it is standing on 4 spindly legs. Within 30 minutes, it is running. It can keep up with a migrating herd, recognize the scent of a predator, and navigate the physical world with a level of competence a human child won't achieve for years. A foal, a baby horse, is walking within the hour. Even our closest relatives, the chimpanzees, arrive with enough neurological wiring to cling to their mother's fur with a grip so strong it can support their entire body weight. They are participants in their own survival from the very first breath. The human baby, by contrast, is a passenger. It lacks the myelin, the fatty insulation on the nerves, to even send a clear signal from the brain to the legs. It is a nervous system under construction, a project that has been halted halfway through and pushed out into the world. If you leave a newborn kitten alone for a few hours, it is a tragedy. If you leave a human newborn alone, it is a death sentence. We are the only species that requires a decade of intensive, near-constant supervision just to reach a baseline of physical autonomy. This profound vulnerability seems like a mistake, a glitch in the evolutionary matrix that should have ended the human experiment before it truly began. But that assumption misses the most startling truth of our biology. This isn't a failure of engineering. It is the most sophisticated gamble in the history of life. We aren't born helpless because evolution couldn't make us stronger. We are born helpless because, for humans, being finished at birth would be a death sentence of a different kind. To understand why, we have to look at the narrowest bottleneck in nature, the human pelvis. For decades, scientists pointed to something called the obstetric dilemma. It's a classic story of two competing needs. First, we decided to walk upright. This required our hips to narrow and tilt to support our weight on 2 legs, creating a much tighter birth canal. Second, we decided to grow massive, energy-hungry brains. A big brain needs a big skull, and a big skull doesn't fit through a narrow pelvis. The traditional theory suggests that evolution struck a desperate compromise. It forced human babies to be born early, before their heads got too big to pass through the exit. We are, in this view, all born premature. This story is perfectly logical, widely accepted, and almost certainly missing the most important part of the puzzle. While the size of the birth canal is a real physical constraint, recent research has started to poke holes in the idea that our hips are the only reason babies are so useless. Dr. Holly Dunsworth, an anthropologist at the University of Rhode Island, challenged this obstetric dilemma by looking at the actual metabolic cost of pregnancy. It turns out, a human mother isn't just a vessel, she's a power plant. By the 9-month mark, the developing fetus is consuming a massive amount of energy. The mother's basal metabolic rate, the amount of energy her body uses just to stay alive, spikes to nearly 2.5 times its normal level during the 3rd trimester. This is a hard physiological ceiling. Humans, and most mammals, simply cannot sustain a metabolic rate much higher than that for an extended period. If the pregnancy lasted any longer, the mother's body would literally begin to break down. She would be unable to provide enough fuel for both herself and the rapidly growing brain of the infant. We aren't born early because our heads are too big. We are born because our mother's fuel tanks are running on empty. The human infant is evicted because the lease on the womb has become too expensive to pay. You'd think that hitting this metabolic wall would be a disaster for the child, forcing it into the world before it's ready to face it. But this is where the pivot happens. This premature exit isn't just a way to save the mother, it's the secret to why you are capable of abstract thought, language, and complex culture today. If we stayed in the womb until our brains were as developed as a newborn chimp's, we would stay inside for another 6 to 9 months. We would emerge with our neural pathways already hardened, our instincts already set, and our view of the world already decided by our genetic code. We would be like the wildebeest, functional but rigid. Instead, we emerge as a mass of unformed potential. In the first few years of life, a human baby's brain is a firestorm of activity. It is creating upwards of 700 new synaptic connections every single second. This is a level of neuroplasticity that is unheard of in any other species. Because the brain is finishing its construction outside the womb, it isn't being built by a blueprint alone. It is being built by the environment. It is being sculpted by the sound of the mother's voice, the texture of the air, the social cues of the tribe, and the specific challenges of the landscape. This means that a human baby born in the freezing Arctic and a human baby born in the sweltering Amazon rainforest arrive with the exact same brain, but they don't stay that way for long. The Arctic baby's brain will prune away the pathways it doesn't need and strengthen the ones required for survival in the cold, for understanding a specific language, and for navigating a specific social hierarchy. The Amazonian baby will do the same for the jungle. This is the blank slate advantage. By being born helpless and unfinished, we gave ourselves the ability to be universal. We are the only species that doesn't just adapt to its environment over millions of years of evolution, we adapt to our environment in a single generation, during the first few years of life. The helplessness of the infant is the price we pay for the flexibility of the adult. We are born as a question, and the world provides the answer. This is why you can learn any language, master any tool, and inhabit any culture. The wildebeest is born knowing how to be a wildebeest, and it will never be anything else. You were born knowing how to be anything, because you were born knowing nothing at all. You might see this extreme plasticity as a gift, a miraculous opening of the mind that allows for human genius. But look closer at the cost of that gift. A system that is maximally open is also maximally vulnerable. A brain that is finishing its construction in the world is a brain that can be easily broken. This is why the human 4th trimester, the first 3 months of life outside the womb, is such a high-stakes period. During this time, the infant's nervous system is still fundamentally fetal. It possesses the Moro reflex, that sudden, frantic flinging of the arms at any loud noise. This isn't a conscious choice. It's a primitive alarm system from a brain that doesn't yet have the inhibitory circuits to say, it's just a door slamming. The baby cannot regulate its own temperature, its own digestion, or even its own emotions. It relies on a process called co-regulation. The adult must literally provide the nervous system that the baby lacks. When a mother holds a crying infant skin to skin, her heartbeat, her warmth, and her calm breathing act as an external pacemaker for the baby's chaotic internal state. We don't just feed our children, we lend them our bodies to help them finish building their own. This total, crushing dependency should have made us easy prey. In the wild, a creature that requires 24-hour care for years is a massive liability. Yet, instead of making us weak, this vulnerability forced us to become the most social creatures on Earth. Because a single human mother cannot realistically provide the level of care an infant needs while also gathering food, finding water, and avoiding predators, we evolved a system of cooperative breeding. Anthropologists call this alloparenting. It is the reason we have grandmothers who live long past their reproductive years. The grandmother hypothesis suggests that the presence of an older, experienced female who can help care for these helpless infants was so beneficial to the survival of the species that evolution selected for women who lived decades after they could no longer have children of their own. Our helplessness created the village. It created the need for deep social bonds, for trust, for shared resources, and for language. We didn't become social because we were smart. We became smart because our babies were so helpless that we had to build a complex society just to keep them alive. You might think that after millions of years, we've reached a point where we understand this trade-off completely. But the more we look into the why of baby helplessness, the more we find that the big brain explanation is only a small piece of the story. There is a study from 2023, published in the journal Nature Ecology and Evolution, that looked at 140 different mammalian species. The researchers found that humans aren't actually as premature as we thought when you measure us against our total lifespan and metabolic rate. We are actually right on schedule for a primate of our size. The reason we feel so helpless isn't that we are born too early, it's that we have so much further to go. A chimp brain is about 40% of its adult size at birth. A human brain is only about 25%. It's not that we are starting from a deficit, it's that the finish line for a human brain is located in a different zip code. We have built a cognitive skyscraper that takes decades to finish, and you simply cannot build a skyscraper while the occupant is already trying to live in the penthouse. The upholstery of the brain, the white matter and the complex wiring, needs a stable, protected environment to settle. If we were running around the savannah at 6 minutes old, our brains would have to be hardwired for movement and survival. By being immobile, the human infant allows its brain to dedicate every single ounce of energy to the higher-order functions of social cognition and symbolic thought. This suggests that our helplessness isn't just a side effect of our intelligence, it is the primary driver of it. We are the altricial species of the highest order. In biology, altricial means requiring nourishment. It refers to birds born blind and featherless in a nest, as opposed to precocial birds like ducks that can swim immediately. Humans have taken the altricial strategy to its absolute extreme. We have traded immediate physical competence for long-term cognitive dominance. But even that doesn't fully capture the strangeness of the human infant. Consider the social brain hypothesis, which argues that the primary reason we have such large brains isn't to solve problems like, how do I find fruit? But to solve the problem of, how do I navigate this group of other humans? A human baby, despite being unable to roll over, is a genius at social manipulation. Within weeks, they can distinguish their mother's face from a stranger's. They can track eye contact. They can mimic facial expressions. A newborn chimp can outclimb a human child for years, but it will never understand the concept of shared intentionality, the ability to look at an object, then look at another person and understand that you are both thinking about the same thing. The human baby is born with its physical hardware turned off so that its social software can have 100% of the bandwidth. You'd think this would lead to a very peaceful, nurtured existence, but the reality is a bit more harrowing. The transition from the womb to the world is a sensory assault. Inside, the world was rhythmic, muffled, and constant. Outside, everything is jagged. The light is too bright, the air is too cold, and the silence is terrifying. This is why we swaddle infants, recreating the pressure of the uterine wall, and why we rock them, recreating the motion of the mother's walking. We are trying to trick their nervous systems into thinking they haven't been born yet. We are maintaining the illusion of the womb so the brain can keep building itself in peace. But even in this protected state, the brain is making ruthless decisions. This is the process of synaptic pruning. You are born with more neurons than you will ever have again. As you grow, your brain looks at the connections that aren't being used and systematically destroys them. It is a use it or lose it architecture. If a child isn't exposed to language during a critical window, the pathways for language will be pruned away, and they may never be able to speak fluently. The helplessness of the infant is a period of narrowing. We start with the potential to be anyone, and every day we spend as a helpless infant, we become more specifically us. This leads to a startling realization about the nature of being human. We often think of ourselves as independent individuals, masters of our own destiny who navigate the world with our own private minds. But our biology tells a different story. Because we are born unfinished, because we are co-regulated by others, and because our brains are built by our social environment, we are essentially distributed beings. A human being is not a closed system. We are a biological collaboration. The infant lying in the crib isn't just a separate creature waiting to grow up, it is a node in a social network that stretches back millions of years. Its very survival depends on its ability to charm, to manipulate, and to bond with the adults around it. The oxytocin loop, the chemical bond that forms between a parent and a child during touch and feeding, is the glue that holds our species together. Without that intense, irrational, and chemically driven love, no rational adult would ever put up with the demands of a human infant. Evolution didn't just give us big brains. It gave us the specific chemistry required to tolerate the most demanding offspring in the history of life. You might find it comforting to think that our vulnerability is what makes us so special, that our neediness is the root of our empathy and our art. And in many ways, that is true. But there is a darker side to this evolutionary trade-off. Because we are so plastic, because we are so shaped by our early years, we are also incredibly fragile. Small changes in the environment of a developing infant, a lack of touch, a lack of stimulation, a lack of security, can have cascading effects that last for a lifetime. We are the only species that can be broken by a lack of love, because we are the only species that uses love as a primary building material for our brains. The wildebeest doesn't need to be loved to know how to run from a lion. A human child needs to be held to know how to think. This is the ultimate risk of the human strategy. We put all our eggs in the basket of social stability. We bet our entire future on the idea that the village would always be there to catch us. This gamble has paid off in a way that is almost terrifying. By being born helpless, we escaped the prison of instinct. We became the only animal that can choose its own purpose. We can live in space, we can dive to the bottom of the ocean, and we can write poetry about the stars, all because we arrived on Earth unable to even hold our own heads up. We are a species of perpetual children, forever learning, forever adapting, and forever dependent on one another. The neoteny of humans, the retention of juvenile traits into adulthood, means that even as grown-ups, we keep that infant-like plasticity longer than any other animal. We never really finish building our brains. We just get better at hiding the construction work. You are sitting at your table, finishing that cup of coffee, and you feel entirely in control. You feel like a finished product, a singular consciousness in a functional body. But the ghost of that helpless infant is still there, wired into your cortex. Every time you learn a new skill, every time you adapt to a new social situation, and every time you feel a deep, instinctive need for the company of others, you are using the tools that were forged during those years of total dependency. You aren't powerful despite your early helplessness, you are powerful because of it. We are the species that learned how to turn vulnerability into a weapon. We turned our premature birth into a universal passport. You look at your hands now, capable and steady, and it's hard to imagine they were ever so weak they couldn't grasp a simple toy. It's hard to remember the time when the entire world was a terrifying blur of light and sound that you couldn't understand. But that version of you is the reason you can understand any of this at all. You were born as a blank page so that the universe could write its story through you. You were born unable to do anything so that, eventually, you could do everything. It is a beautiful, fragile, and utterly bizarre way to run a planet. And yet, here we are. We are the masters of the world, all because we were once the most pathetic creatures in it. But don't let that sense of mastery fool you into thinking the gamble is over. The same openness that allowed you to learn and grow also leaves you permanently unfinished, forever searching for the connections that started in that nursery. We like to think we've outgrown that early terror of the dark, that we've moved past the need for someone else to regulate our world. We haven't. We've just built bigger, more complex villages to hide the fact that we are still, at our core, that same infant staring at the ceiling, waiting for a signal that we aren't alone. If you've ever felt that deep, unshakable pull toward a community, or that strange sense that your mind isn't entirely your own, you're just feeling the biological echoes of the trade-off that made us human. If this dive into the strange, vulnerable roots of our species has shifted how you look at the person in the mirror, or the child in the crib, consider staying a while. We're all just trying to finish our construction together. Subscribe if you want to keep exploring the hidden blueprints of what we are. You can close this tab now, go back to your day, and pretend you are a self-made, independent force of nature. You can tell yourself that you are the architect of your own mind. But as you walk away, remember that every thought you have, every word you speak, and every tool you touch was a gift given to you during your years of total surrender. You are a biological miracle, yes, but you are also a biological debt. You are a mind that was built by others, in a body that wasn't ready for the world, sustained by a social contract that began before you could even breathe. We are the only creatures who have to be taught how to be what we are. And that means that if the village ever truly disappears, the human being disappears right along with it. We didn't just survive the world, we forced the world to finish us. It's a terrifyingly fragile way to exist. Nature doesn't give anything away for free. For every ounce of genius we gained, we paid in a gallon of vulnerability. We are the masters of the earth, but we are held together by a thread so thin it shouldn't even exist. We are a species of survivors who cannot survive alone. Sleep well knowing that your brilliance is just the scar tissue of your original helplessness.